All right. Good morning, everyone. I can see na continually pumapasok po all our teacher trainers. No, I saw a few who have been with UP Open University since March with all the webinars and training sessions that we've conducted virtually. So hello po sa inyo and to the others as well na medyo bago in sa paningin ko the schools, no? But for sure you watched and or participated in previous webinars and sessions na we've conducted and facilitated. I am Ana Katrina Marshall, one of the regular faculty members at the Faculty of Education, UP Open University. I'll be your resource person and sort of, I don't want to say expert, no, but more of a, ano lang, faculty member who is about to share her experiences and other colleagues' experiences, as well as results from studies on assessments, and discuss with you, expound on the issues and concerns on assessment design, implementation, and even handling or dealing with concerns in assessment integrity, or even cheating and academic dishonesty, especially now it's an online and flexible learning context. Essentially, all the things that I'll present today are enumeration, elaboration, further explanations of the things that you will find in our course site in Moodle. So, pinunuan ko na siya ng mga materials and activities. There are 3 activities there, but one, the final activity is the only requirement, really. Okay, I can see from my notifications na continuously may mga pumapasok na teacher trainers, representatives, probably officials, no? You're also handling administrative positions. And now, and in relation to the previous sessions, based on what you learned or relearned, because I know naman hindi naman bago yung ibang mga principles and guidelines presented, you may have already decided, or your colleagues, your faculty members that you are assisting, you may have already decided on the activities and assessments in their courses, especially since ongoing na yung semester, no, yung academic year. In relation to the previous topics, you may have already designed the combination of synchronous and asynchronous sessions, which technologies may be useful. And then as you proceed to the succeeding sections, decide on how cognitive presence, social presence, teaching presence, which is the topic last time, no, may be established or highlighted on learner motivation and engagement and building learning communities, among others, sa consideration nyo in your assessment, in your teaching and learning delivery and implementation. Now I'm gonna start sharing. Let's begin now with the presentation. Regardless, no, of the mode of delivery, let's establish this. Our main goal really is we want to ensure that assessment plan and tools that we have and that we'll implement will yield outputs that demonstrate the knowledge, skills, and or attitudes you wish for the learners to develop or hone. As teacher trainers, this is something that you know that you need to emphasize to your colleagues. And this is true even when you were still doing the more traditional teaching, no? As it is now, as you deliver the courses in the online and flexible learning, distributed and open learning mode. The key questions that you may need to address, or you may ask your teachers or faculty members to address would be, first, what are the similarities and differences in assessment design and administration or implementation between the more traditional classroom setting, which you or most teachers in your SUCs and HEIs may be more familiar with, and the remote learning setting? By differences, we do not mean naman is na one, the set of assessment dun sa in one mode, in the traditional mode, is far more superior dun sa online. It's just that they may have differences. Another question would be, what key principles of open, distance, and e-learning, or ODEL, can be adopted as teachers ensure integrity in the assessment process? For better or for worse, what you are doing now, what your teachers are doing now, have elements of openness, open learning, distance education, and e-learning. This presentation, it simply provides the gist of the section first of the module on assessment in our course site. And then second, just a few guidelines, points for consideration, strategies from experiences as well as research studies na literature. But it does not address all, no? Kasi assessment really, as we know, it's a very complicated, messy, bloody issue or concern. Pero hopefully, as you train your faculty and your colleagues in your universities, respective universities and colleges, you'll be able to assist them in the redesign and implementation in this current setting. Now, where shall we begin? You say, okay, you know those two key questions to ask, but where can we begin? Before dipping our toes on the issue of observing and maintaining assessment integrity in the online and or flexible learning setting, let's go back to the fundamentals first. Let's review and adopt the basic steps of assessment in the first place at the course level. There are a number of models that you can adhere to. One of them is Walborg's three-step process, in which the goal is the first, which is somewhat in line with Wiggins and McLean's backward design framework, where you identify your desired results. So that's the first step in the goal. And we identify the desired results by examining the standards and curriculum expectations. Essentially, this portion of my presentation now, refresher lang. We go back lang to the things that you've done, you've conducted, based on your own initiatives in your respective colleges and universities, directives of CHED, as well as your insights, the insights that you've gained from the numerous webinars that you've attended. So that's the first step. We conduct sort of curriculum review. Just so we'll still be clarified in the goal, the desired results that we want. The next step would be information, in which case we select or we determine the acceptable evidence. And we address the concern on how we'll be able to know if the learners have achieved or are achieving the desired results that we have determined in sa goal part. Sa goal part, by the way, we simply ask ourselves, now what do we want our students to be able to do? This should be clarified sa inyo as the faculty, as well as sa colleagues nyo na you are assisting or you are training. At the end of the course, what do we want our students to be able to do? Or even if it's gonna be within the module or unit of a specific course, at the end of that module or unit, what do we want our students to be able to do or know or learn, depending on which level of cognitive level we are targeting. And then next, for the second stage, yung information, yun nga, we want to determine, clarify what is the acceptable evidence, given then the scenario now. So we ask ourselves, how well are our students achieving the goals? What factors influence their learning? And then lastly, we end with the last step, which is action. So assertive yung, and active yung last step ng basic assessment steps, which is consistent with the idea na continuous naman kasi ang teaching learning process. In the backward design framework, this is the stage where we plan the learning experiences naturally, the overall instruction. We complete the content, the topics, and all other resources that we want to add for us to be able to achieve yung learning outcome. However, in Waldorf's three assessment steps, the focus of this step remains on action. It's a set of action being either a potential redesign or a development of new learning activities and assessments based on previous assessment results. That's why we ask ourselves, how can we use the information that we've gathered to improve the students' learning? So that's where we should begin. Then, but in terms of assuming we all agree really that there is a need to go back to the drawing board, review the curriculum, revise if needed be, paano naman na yung guidelines and strategies that we need to take note of to ensure that academic integrity, specifically assessment integrity, will be observed, maintained, and observed. Now, I tried to summarize the guidelines and strategies into 5. Definitely, they're not comprehensive enough, but these 5 guidelines and strategies would be good enough starting point as basis for your redesign and continuous development of your assessment. Now, with the assumption that we adhere to a version that is equivalent to this table projected, let's focus on revisiting the course plan and ensuring alignment. The first 3 guidelines out of the 5, refresher pa rin siya. Now ask ourselves key questions, and our answer should be a resounding yes. We should be confident enough in the answer to these guide questions in relation to the review of your course plan. No? In whatever format yung pina-follow natin. So first, is the alignment clear? Wait, let me go back. In your version of a course plan, or in our case, what we call horizontal syllabus, definitely there should be your week, approximate number of hours or period or duration for a specific module. And then just so you be sure of your alignment, so you have your course outcomes and then the intended learning outcomes that will address that specific course outcome, your module, your unit, or your topics. And then you identify your resources, and then activities, assessment, and other components that will be useful or relevant for your institution. Now, in the context of assessment, by ensuring alignment, you have to take note of and ensure na yung assessment mo really addresses or help yield the learning outcomes. So, ganun lang naman siya kasimple. That's why yung question nga is the alignment clear? Do the assessments help address a learning objective or yield the learning outcomes, specifically the learning outcome which are considered most essential right now? Kasi in your curriculum review, di ba, you've identified the most essential learning competencies naman, based, of course, within shared guidelines, as well as your own institution's decision based on series of discussions. And given the limitations as well as opportunities now, so dun ba sa design natin, yes, may alignment. That's the first question. Pero clearly ba na na-address yung most essential na outcomes that we've identified? Because if your answer is not so much, then definitely there is a need for you or the teachers that you're assisting to decide on more suitable assessment methods and tasks. And how are we going to decide? One way would be to follow this suggestion by Dustin Summy of the University of Arkansas, where he presented a pyramid based on Bloom's cognitive taxonomy of objectives. Now you can take a look at this as set of generic lists of formative and summative assessments, which may be suitable for a specific level based nga on Bloom's taxonomy. But if you will notice, the MC stands for multiple choice. If you'll notice, multiple choice type of tests may be used as both as a formative assessment and as a summative assessment. And then from the lower order to higher order thinking skills. It all depends on your design. But this is just one guide. And of course, hindi pa comprehensive yung list, but this is a starting point already. Another basis which you can use would be refer to this guide on the suitable assessment tasks and methods based on the generic domains of learning outcomes. This one, regardless if the tasks, the assessment tasks or methods will be used as a formative or summative assessment. Here are a few options. This is based on the resource of the University of New South Wales on assessing learning in universities. In their table, they group the learning outcomes into domains. One is, for example, if it's more on about thinking critically and making judgments, where you are expecting your learners to develop arguments, reflect, evaluate, assess, and judge. These are the more suitable tasks or methods based on their study project. You can still, even in the online and flexible learning setting, you can still have them do essay, report, journals, draft letters, advice letters, analyze and present a case, prepare a paper, conduct a book review, write a newspaper article, comment on the article, and so on and so forth. And then another set of domain in their guide, if the domain is more on solving problems and developing plans, the more suitable tasks and methods could be analysis and presentation of problem scenario. You can still do group work, prepare a report, committee report, and so on and so forth. Now again, it all depends on your design if you will use them as a formative assessment or summative assessment. And then another domain now is on if the domain of learning outcome is on performing procedures and demonstrating techniques. So here are the assessment on the right. Here are the assessment tasks and methods which you can adopt. And then for managing and developing oneself, it's more really of producing a journal portfolio, and then other projects that will require group work. For assessing and managing information, you can have them do these 5 among initial choices. And then demonstrating knowledge and understanding, so medyo lower level. So here are the options. For last sets, designing, creating, performing. So ganun pa rin. You can do portfolio assessment, performance assessment, have them do projects, and so on and so forth. For communicating the set ng learning outcomes, you can have them do all these. Now, if you notice, they're not really new. It's more of a refresher. Since now you're going back to the drawing board. And if in the basic questions na is the alignment clear, if your answer to that ay hindi masyado, then kaya nyo lang kailangan balikan yung mga planned assessments nila. Another way, in your revisiting the assessment tools and methods that you wish to administer pa rin in the online and flexible learning setting is to consider Wiggins and McLeod's suggestion naman of choosing among and using a continuum of assessment methods. Especially since assessment is almost always not just a simple assessment of learning scenario or activity. Basically, they are encouraging that you use a combination of informal checks. From informal checks lang, as in, by informal checks, you will just check on your learners. Right? Simple chat with them or leave them an email message or something like that. To having them do performance assessment. Essentially, they are suggesting that you use a combination of traditional and alternative forms of assessment. They're not saying naman na don't do quizzes and tests anymore, especially now. They're saying lang that you revisit na your plan. And ideally, you make use of the more traditional assessments for those content which are which are interesting and useful to know. So those that are worth being familiar with and those that are important. While use more alternative forms of assessment for the essential topics and those that you wish for your students to have enduring understanding of. So mas dito na siya. Now, if wala namang problema, your answer and your colleagues, your faculty members' answer ay, yes, we're confident enough in our course plan, in the constructive alignment of the course plan. So proceed tayo dun sa second na set ng guidelines and strategies. You find that balance naman in your assessment activities. Try to achieve that realistic, healthy, and meaningful assessment mix. If in terms of content or choosing the topics which you will cover in the setting now, we can frame this as a classification of what is essential versus useful versus merely interesting. Or those that are, as I mentioned, those that are worth being familiar with versus those that are important, really important to know and do. And then lastly, those types of topic or the contents that you really would want your students to have enduring understanding of. Pero this is in terms of content. This is in terms of the set of resources and topics and the minor activities that we intend to do now. But how about in terms of assessment? So in terms of assessment, we can consider, and we must consider definitely, the current situation of your learners and teachers. The most essential learning competencies identified, as mentioned earlier. And lastly, how you can go about doing the assessment, most specifically the administration of that assessment, given the current resources that you and your university or college have now. More specifically, you ask yourselves, what can be retained as is, but will only be administered remotely? What needs to be redesigned, whether it will be in terms of mechanics, guidelines in your assessment, or format lang ba siya? And what needs really to be replaced? Because there will really be an instance na you really have to replace your assessment. You really have to design a new one. The subsequent concerns under these basic questions would be, are the assessment methods and tasks representative of the various purposes of assessment? Kasi I mentioned na more effective assessment, really, it's not just assessment of learning. Unless we're talking about high stakes assessment na would require really accreditation and test of skills, and crucial kasi that the students will develop those skills before they can advance dun sa next level. Mga ganyan. Ibang usapan na yun. But other than those high stakes talaga, like for example, if mga pre-med, diba, yung mga ganun na life and death situation if hindi nila marunong ng skill. But other than that, ideally, for an assessment to be more effective, you try to come up with a healthy mix of assessment for learning, of learning, and as learning. And then another concern would be, do they really target the most essential set of learning competencies? And lastly, are they possible to administer with the use of online technologies are possible to be incorporated in the printed module in case you're doing both. Now, just a side note on the purposes of assessment, because I highlighted that. In the resource Rethinking Classroom Assessment with Purpose in Mind, they're really pushing for the idea of the three purposes of assessment and finding the right balance given your context. Uh, Under assessment for learning, you need to bear in mind that you are assessing because you want to determine the next steps to assist the student, to advance the student's learning. Under assessment of learning, which is, I'm sure, most of your faculty are more familiar with and comfortable with, because there's this level of certification and you want to be informed and you want others to be informed of the proficiency of the student, still in relation to the learning outcomes. And then the last purpose of assessment, I guess this is the most difficult in a way to design, but has its own benefit din kasi, especially now and in dealing with college students, no, na you would want to be more responsible for their own learning. Now, assessment as learning, you are assessing because you want to guide and provide opportunities for each student to monitor and critically reflect on his or her learning and identify na sila mismo the next steps that they will need to do. Now, what are we assessing? If it's assessment for learning, you're focused more on really is finding out the progress and the needs in relation to the outcomes. If it's of learning, the extent to which students can apply the key concepts, knowledge, skills, attitudes still related to the outcomes. And then if it's assessment as learning, you want to be able to find out, and the students themselves to find out how their thinking process, how they learn best, what strategies he or she uses to support or challenge that learning, and the mechanisms that he or she does to make adjustments. Now, that's under reviewing the healthy mix. No? That's a segue to this third guideline, reviewing the mix of your assessment. Again, establish assessment principles and best practices, especially in the online, flexible, or remote setting. Now, there are numerous principles and guidelines in assessment at the course level, but a few here are, the first one is from Palov and Pratt's principles, which establish well-known guiding principles for effective assessment. First, you use assessment techniques that fit the context and align with learning objectives. Second, design learner-centered assessments that include self-reflection, it touches on the assessment as learning concept. And then another set, you have the principles of good practice for assessing student learning, where it says that assessment is most effective when it reflects an understanding of learning as multidimensional, integrated, and revealed in performance over time, which implies that really assessment is an ongoing activity, or it's composed of a set of activities, and it's not just done per episode. It's not episodic, because learning in the first place is a complex process. Learning what the students know is just one aspect of it. Then you need to be able to go beyond that, and you need to be able to train your faculty, your colleagues, to go beyond that by finding out what the learners can do with what they know. It involves not only knowledge and abilities, but values, attitudes, habits of mind that affect both academic success and performance na beyond na dun sa class nyo, sa courses nyo. That's why assessment should reflect those understandings by employing different assessment networks. And then another principle that they want to stress is that assessment requires attention to outcomes, but also and equally to the experiences that lead to those outcomes. This principle is indicative of doing assessment for learning and in a way as learning did. The information about whether or not the learner is meeting a specific learning outcome, it's highly important. Where the students end up, they matter greatly. But to improve kasi the outcomes, we need to know about the experiences of our learners along the way. Know about the curriculum, about teaching, the kind of efforts that they've exerted, that will lead to them meeting yung particular outcome na yun. And we can do that through our assessments. We will be able to understand the conditions for which the students or the learners can learn better, no? And so on and so forth. And then lastly, as for few examples of guidelines and principles, this one is from the perspective of the students, based on the United Kingdom's National Union of Students principles of effective feedback and assessment. Two of which say students should have their workload fairly distributed throughout the year rather than clustering deadlines together. This one, I relate this doon sa mas specific na strategies and guidelines in ensuring the academic integrity of your assessment. And then next, assessment criteria should be clear, linked to learning outcomes, and easily accessible to students. Students should be supported to understand them and to understand what constitutes academic misconduct. Ito rin, related siya dun sa specific guidelines that I will expound on later. If you'll notice, even though these are just a few sample principles and guidelines of good and effective assessment practice, nandun yung pag-stress ng alignment niya. And really ensuring na, oo, hindi lang siya simple declaration na, well, really aligned sila. Merong close examination. Now, assuming that we've covered yung basic three sa guidelines and strategies that I mentioned. Punta tayo dun sa fourth. Prepare assessment activity plans in whatever formats that your college or university decides to adopt, and use them as your initial assessment design guide, especially since you will need to relay these pieces of information to the learners in advance. Diba, binanggit dun sa principles, guiding principles na sure ka nga na aligned naman. There is course alignment. Aligned yung assessment tasks and methods mo sa specific learning outcome. Pero communicated ba yun sa student? And even the idea of, or the concept of academic dishonesty. So, in addressing yung issue kasi ng academic integrity and assessment integrity, you have to ensure na naka-communicate sila. Communicate the clear alignment of assessment and learning outcome and the assessment purpose. The purpose to the learners. How can you do that? One way would be you prepare an assessment activity plan. This one's for you as the faculty members that you are assisting, you are helping to train. So you can use this activity plan guide, where your faculty will be sort of encouraged, I don't want to say forced, encouraged to take a look at their assessment activity and see what's the purpose of the assessment in relation to the intended learning outcomes and for that specific module or topic. And then what would be the tasks, specific tasks and expected outputs from the student? What are the procedures that you expect them to follow? And other reminders for doing the tasks. Of course, your rubric or criteria. They may include a percentage of the final grade that the assessment activity will account for, because that's also one crucial guide and way or strategy for them to be more invested in their own learning. And the schedule and manner of submission, it's important now because we're not in the face-to-face setting anymore, per se. So kailangan communicated rin yan sa kanila. And other relevant details such as the definition of terms, if there are terms that you need to clarify, list of tools and resources to be used or consulted in case there are other resources or reference materials na you haven't provided them yet prior to the assessment activity. Whether there will be a self-assessment component or peer assessment component dun sa assessment activity. Now, essentially, this is just a guiding table. Kaya nga, it's an activity plan lang. But all those information, you have to communicate them anyway to your students. So might as well, gumawa na kayo or pagawan nyo na yung mga teachers ng version ng ganito. Especially now, sa case kasi ngayon, the faculty cannot be with the students all the time. Diba? Even virtually, even through Zoom sessions, Google Meet sessions, you cannot address their concerns, would be concerns 24 hours a day. Kaya, unless you commit to doing that, kaya important na all aspects, basic aspects of your assessment activity are covered and communicated. And this is one way for you to be able to do that, or your faculty to be able to do that. And then lastly, this is the meat really. Focus not on preventing cheating, but more on promoting academic integrity. Let's dispel that notion that when we're doing and administering assessments remotely, there's a higher or greater risk that the learners will engage in dishonest behaviors and that they will cheat, because studies about cheating and academic dishonesty in general, in the more traditional context and in the online learning setting, they yield conflicting results pa rin naman. The focus talaga more is on the discourse on academic integrity. That's what we should be discussing in the first place. Especially if assessment is, if most academicians are saying that assessment is in the heart of meaningful academic endeavor. Plus yung concern na, okay, let's talk about promoting academic integrity, but how are we going to do that? It may be a bold statement for me to make, but one universally effective way to reduce the challenges on assessment integrity is to address the concern on the instructional design. Kaya dun tayo nag-umpisa of the course. No? Kasi there is this one survey I encountered na the design of the course, one factor really for academic dishonesty is that the design of the course itself is more open to dishonesty or aspects of that course. Kaya, then really, we have to be certain dun sa plan natin, sa initial plan. Kaya go back to the drawing board talaga tayo nag-start. Now, also, that's the first point. Second point, and this is, I usually say this in all the webinars and presentations and discussions. I would want to believe that the number of learners who will typically result to seeking shortcuts, they are outnumbered. Those learners who genuinely would like to learn through all the activities, all the assessments that you designed, your faculty members designed, they greatly outnumber those who would most likely seek shortcuts or engage in any form of academic dishonesty such as plagiarism, falsification, fabrication, misrepresentation. And whether you are in the traditional face-to-face classroom or in more flexible and online and remote environment with the courses that you're having. Likewise, regardless of the mode of delivery, if the student intends to cheat, he or she will most likely find a way to do so. But nevertheless, mag-end yung fifth natin will still try to focus on the generic guidelines and strategies that will be helpful, hopefully, at least in the commonly used assessment methods, no, in this setting, which are these 8. Now here in this table, the black check mark suggests that the assessment purpose of these assessments may be best or ideal to use for. So online quizzes or tests, you're based on your traditional pen and paper or pencil and paper test items. They really ideally can be used for assessment for learning and assessment of learning. So formative assessment and summative assessments talaga siya. Not so much on metacognitive type of assessment. But you can still do so. Kaya medyo reddish, pinkish mark. You can still do so. It's just that you need to redesign the items that will focus more on finding out the strategies, metacognitive strategies of your learners and how he or she learns. For discussion forums, mostly it can be used as a way for you to do assessment as learning and for learning, and then make adjustments based on what you find out in their posts, pero not so much as assessment of learning. So you can do that. They can be high-stakes assessments, yung posts nila sa discussion. So ganun lang yung idea ng table na to. But of course, still, specific assessment methods, they will need specific types of guidelines and strategies and tips in terms of design and administration if we want somehow to prevent cheating behaviors, but more on promoting academic integrity. So for quizzes and test items, which are mostly your MCQs, true or false, other pen and paper type of test items. Some more traditional test forms of assessment. Of course, you still have to review and observe the basic principles of good test construction. And then the designing of effective tests, regardless naman yan ng delivery format. And a few of those guidelines or strategies would be, first, do not lift directly from a source. You modify your assessment task to focus on a specific, whether local yan, recent, personal factors, something that they cannot easily search in search engine sites or find in a specific module or book or any other reading material. Because then, if that's the case, the quiz activity, the test, will simply be a scavenger hunt, and you just simply test the skills of your learners as to how quickly they can find the information from a specific reference material. So at the very least, you try to design items which may require them to conduct initial research, kahit minor lang yan, analyze factors or constructs based on your reading materials, and or synthesize. At the same time, another strategy instead of lifting directly from a source, you try to design questions that build on prior coursework. In a way, you are requiring them knowledge that has already been covered and assessed previously. So, tipong design questions, these ones according to Krasak, design questions that would not be answered easily unless the individual has done the previous work in the course. That's first, under quizzes and test items. Another, you can ensure that all items of the test or quiz should be independent of each other to ensure that there are no hints to answers in other items. So avoid items which furnish the answers to the other items. Avoid trick or catch items that are phrased in a way that the correct answer depends on a single keyword. Not even your good students or diligent students cannot uh, find the answer to, or can be confused, easily confused. Mm, okay. Make sure that there are no unintended clues within an item. For example, in terms of wording uh, your items, the response choices, you have to be careful with that. Yung articles mo, your a and an, pronouns, and even parallelism in your choices or your options. Kaya you make the wording in the response choices consistent with the items then. Next is, if it's a true or false item, you avoid qualified statements such as often, occasionally, never, maybe, generally, because good true or false items should be defensible and it's not ambiguous. Yung nagiging issue pa siya or concern pa siya for discussion. And then lastly, use a bank of questions. You give each student a different exam, but with similar scope and same target skills. Or the alternative would be you prepare multiple versions of the same question or test item. So that's the first set for quizzes and test items. Another set would be, based on relevant studies, they suggest that you set a reasonable and fixed amount of time to respond to each item. This way, the students are prevented to, they don't have time to source answers from others in their homes or in relevant resources or online. Another would be, if you're doing online quizzes, you use the shuffled feature, shuffled questions that will allow only one item to be viewed at a time. Prevent backtracking. For example, you may group your quiz items into pages and then disable going back to a previous page when done. Or if you do not have a learning management system with a quiz feature that allows that, what you can do is you provide items in chunks. So before they can proceed to answering another set. And you limit the assessment time, meaning the amount of time the assessment or test is available to students. For example, if there is this formative 20-item quiz that will only be available over the weekend. So let's be more specific, from Friday night up to Sunday night only, exactly 11 p.m. So they have a choice pa rin, depending on, for example, connectivity nila, bandwidth issues, kung when they'll be able to access the quiz within the time frame that we gave. At saka if you have, if the quiz is a timed quiz, so say 30 minutes lang, one attempt, ganyan ba. So that's something that you can explore. You can have your teachers or faculty explore. But kahit limited yung assessment time, you are encouraged to add a practice quiz with unlimited attempts, or kung ilan man yan, multiple attempts, so that your students, your learners can experience how it is like to take an online exam, especially those who are not that used to it if it's an online exam. This is crucial strategy because some of them kasi may have test anxiety even hindi online, even in the face-to-face setting. At tapos, if you are going to conduct the test or the quiz online, it may add to their worries. Plus, the practice of providing quizzes with multiple or unlimited attempts may serve as an opportunity rin kasi for assessment for learning. And then another strategy would be to ensure that the learners understand the instructions before asking them to answer. So you provide a generic introduction or set of instructions before they can actually see the test items and answer the test items. And then the one below, you make use if you have the resources for it, and all the earlier strategies cannot be done, are not sufficient yet. You explore online proctoring software or online proctoring mechanisms, invigilated exams. Kahit as simple lang as, even if it's not a software really, even if it's just, self-paid software or subscription, no? Even if it's just doing or conducting dual cam setup, assuming of course the resources will allow you to do so. But more importantly, mas ito kasi yun, you maximize the alternative forms of assessment. Use online quizzes or tests frequently for formative assessments. Again, we're not yet talking about yung mga high stakes talaga na kailangan traditional quiz or test item yung gagawin. But if you are targeting higher order thinking skills, it would be easier to design and implement assessments na mas more on the alternative forms kasi. So yun yung last strategy for that, to promote academic integrity and in a way lessen dishonesty. Now, in terms of the discussion of forums or boards, and even yung mga assessments that are focused on expecting the students to write something. First, you need to be able to establish your institution's honor code and policy and communicate this to your students. This is one strategy to adopt, which you can apply for discussion forums and boards and even beyond. You clarify what academic integrity is for your institution, what will be the consequence for academic dishonesty, but essentially what's the honor code of your college or university. Because you have to have a shared understanding of what academic integrity means, or even what constitutes cheating in your context. Next, be comprehensive in your set of instructions for a specific forum thread. Be clear in the kind of forum questions you will ask, in your discussion protocol, in your discussion plan. And additionally kasi, when you use discussion forums or discussion boards as an assessment, explain what is it for, what is its relationship to the rest of the discussions, and in meeting a specific learning outcome. And you may also use the discussion forum din naman kasi as a venue for the students to explain their process in coming up with a specific output and their insights and reflections, which can allude kasi to how they did what they did and why. So that's one way for you to double check, di ba, whatever outputs they have. If you have doubts na sila ba yung gumawa nito talaga or something. So you maximize the use of discussion forum there. Now, in terms of, kasi na-mention dito, you need to be clear with your discussion protocol or your discussion plan. Ma'am Arinto and Dean Garcia, Pat Arinto and Dean Garcia, they mentioned the specific activity guide for discussion forums. Now, you have to be you have to clear the learning outcomes for the discussion topic, and then the specific discussion question for that topic, the time that you're allotting for the students to post new discussion forum entries and or respond to other students, other learners' discussion posts, and then the criteria. So in a way, you can clarify the protocol through the plan. How can they post or share then as well? And you can clarify your minimum expectations, at least in the terms of roles that you can assume for a specific discussion forum and your learners are expected to assume for every forum. Now, finally, you may also use a series of discussion forums to get an idea of how the learners normally write and express their thoughts in preparation for high-stakes assessment. So you are to use discussion forum posts as a formative assessment. Medyo mas mapapadali dun sa high-stakes assessment part na any other writing outputs na would have a major, that would be considered as major requirements. Like, such as academic paper, reports, journals, and even reflective blogs. How can you address dishonest behavior and help promote academic integrity, assessment integrity here? In relation to the last point made on discussion forum, you maximize the use of formative assessments to help you gauge the quality of the summative assessment paper output. As mentioned, you make use of discussion forums. And at the same time, you use discussion groups to become more familiar with students and their writing. So in a manner of speaking, you should design scaffolded or linked assessments. Make sure that the students know the difference between quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. And you provide, this one's important, you provide discipline-specific examples of acceptable forms of each. Kasi different disciplines or areas may have different version, diba? And or concept of what is okay, what is plagiarized, what is considered plagiarized already, what would be the acceptable use of direct quotation, what's an effective paraphrase, and so on and so forth. By providing acceptable forms, either you provide example outputs na or samples ng mga good or effective paraphrase or summary. Or you just provide them specific guidelines. So that's good. Kasi, why is this crucial? Most of the time, they may not be aware that what they're already doing ay considered plagiarism. Kaya nga din, di ba, dun sa earlier discussion, your institution should be clear regarding the code and other policies on academic integrity. So here, in the same manner, in terms of plagiarized work, kasi for written assessment outputs, your institution should be clear with the policy on this. Tapos you have to have, at the course level, you have to encourage your faculty to have clear reminders or regulations in their course guides and in their course sites. Include an academic honesty declaration for every paper. Balikan natin yan. I'll expound on that in the next slide. The last, for this slide, you use online software, for example, Turnitin and other softwares. Or you can do simple online search. No? When you receive the paper, the writing output as an assessment output of your learners, you can simply search. Yung iba pa dyan nga, hindi pa binabago yung format. As in literal copy-paste lang nila yung specific section. So you can easily see if it's directly copied from elsewhere, tapos they do not cite the source properly, and they did not paraphrase, and so on and so forth. Now, for the academic honesty declaration or statement of originality, let's expound on this. Because through this, you are explicitly, directly asking the students to honor the code na, your academic integrity code for your college, for your university. And then this one, the different kinds of appeals that you can use in your messaging to your students. This one's a guide from Cornell Center of Teaching Innovation. They are suggesting that you use any of these appeals or a combination of in your assessment guide. You can adhere to logical appeal. Now your message would be telling your students that cheating diminishes the value of this credential, course, or degree. Because there will come a time that you will need the skills and knowledge being assessed in this course or specific topic in this course. And so you don't want to find yourselves in the position that you don't know the skills, you don't know the, the content, which would serve as prerequisite for the next set of knowledge and skills, even beyond the course and beyond the program. So mas ganon yung appeal natin or messaging that we can include in our assessment guide for them. Or you can adhere din daw, adopt emotional or moral appeal. So your messaging would then be something like, cheating is a temptation, sure, we acknowledge that. As the teacher, we acknowledge that. But it's your personal integrity on the line. Then insert the values of your institution, the values that you intend to hone among your students and the graduates. Kasi for example, in the case of UP, it's honor and excellence. So where's the honor in seeking shortcuts and engaging in dishonest behavior just for a potentially higher mark? Ganyan. Then lastly, they are saying you can adopt personal appeal. Your messaging then for your assessment guides would be something like, you want them to make every effort to be honest and honorable in the demonstration of what you have learned in the class, as I made efforts as well in the preparation and all the other resources I've prepared for you to advance your learning. Mas ganyan yung messaging. So an example ng academic integrity, if your institution uses Moodle, kasi hindi lang naman to dun sa mga academic papers and written outputs. Even in the tests and quizzes, you can still adopt that. Moodle, every time a quiz is attempted, there's this statement na something like, I understand what constitutes plagiarism or cheating. I will not undertake such activities. So may ganung declaration yung student. And my declaration or acknowledgement that it's important that I attempt the answering the test on my own, yung mga ganyan. So that's one way. And also that's a form of helping them develop their metacognitive skills, being more responsible for their own learning and being aware of how they learn. Another strategy or tip would be to design application assignments, authentic assessments, and performance-based assessments, and have them submit either a portion of that output or that output itself as an academic paper. Now, nabanggit yung mga different kinds of assessment. Typically, in performance assessments, we provide the students with a task. But we don't end there. We pose questions or present problems or scenarios. Then we ask them to conduct research, kahit mini research lang yan, minor research, beyond the content that you've already provided them with. And to draw on previously learned knowledge, synthesize their findings, and create the output or product or perform the task. Sa dulo pa lang siya. Now, in your assessment design or redesign, one basic guide that you can adopt when you design and implement performance assessment or performance assessment would be Wiggins and McQueen's GRASPs. GRASPs stand for goal, role, audience, situation, product or performance, and then the standards or criteria for success. So essentially, for the goal, we can actually adopt this one directly. In your assessment guide, copy nyo na siya. Your goal is to, and then whatever it is that you want your students or learners to be able to do at the end of that specific assessment. So the goal simply states a problem or challenge that they need to resolve. The role explains who the students are in this scenario, what they're being asked to do. Audience, who are the learners solving the problem for, if it's a problem, who whom do they need to convince of the validity and success of their proposed solution. Mga ganyan. For situation, essentially the context or task of the problem. And then you need to clarify if it's going to be a product, performance, and even the purpose. If it will serve the product or the performance will serve a larger purpose. So, di ba, you go beyond the simple meeting of an academic requirement with your assessment activity. And then yung the standards or criteria for success. Kasi here, in doing so, in adopting this guide, you can help them see the relevance of all the assessment tasks for a significant portion of the course. And in a way, indirectly, they'll be able to see that they cannot rely on shortcuts lang. Like one day before, they'll do that, or they'll seek help, or ask someone else to do that for them. Kasi it's a process. In relation to that, the assessment being a process, and given the current situation, you avoid requiring the students to do and submit the paper in one sitting. This one is related to the concern on the tendency for cognitive offloading, because they are overwhelmed with cognitive demands, so they will just seek aid from tools that are out there that are available for them to do the work. But instead, you may ask them to report their progress on a regular basis instead of requiring them to do the paper in one sitting. Especially if it's a summative assessment, the paper is a summative assessment. Kasi this is one way that you help them gradually build on the work, and you break a potential summative assessment into shorter formative chunks. So ito yung minor activities, low stakes assessments, scaffolded activities before anything else. And then you can also add that reflective component. It will be useful to tie up all the assessment activities together din kasi, and make processing involved. Last is the concept of linked assessments. Either you explore how you may build on assessments within the course. So one, previews or formative assessments, low stakes assessment, leading on, building on, so that they can do the summative one more successfully, or you integrate assessments for the topics of the different courses in the curriculum. This is where you as the teacher trainer will be crucial and needed talaga. Kasi there will be coordination involved. I'm pushing for this given the current scenario. In one of the previous seminars, I gave this one example. For example, you have this learning outcome for purposive communication. You convey ideas through oral, audiovisual, and web-based presentations for different target audiences in local and global settings using appropriate registers. That's for purposive communication. But on the other hand, there's this set of competencies for principles of production course, where you're expecting the learners to distinguish the methods commonly used in determining the moisture, dry matter, organic matter, and ash contents of plant tissue samples. What then would be a example set of assessment? You will ask them to do one assessment activity addressing these two learning outcomes. Pero of course, you as the two faculty for these two courses, they'll use separate rubrics because they will view the outputs and even the process of the students using different lenses. So sa end ng purposive communication, you can have them write a script or ask them to look for a public service announcement and then translate kasi local global settings using appropriate registers and or record using a mobile device. Now, in terms of content, dun papasok si production part where you would ask them to compare the methods commonly used and or create an infographic for the local community. That will need to feature yung methods commonly used. So, isa lang yung gagawin ni estudyante. Pero the processing involved, the steps involved, and the reflection doon sa experience, as well as the actual assessment of learning sa the responsibility ng faculty ay makakover. So that's one strategy. Although I recognize yung, of course, the challenge involved, pero if it can be explored and if it can be done slowly, diba, why not? If for as long as, of course, you work within the bounds of what's allowed. Kasi I understand na there are naman rin requirements that you need to meet at the level of yung sa course lang na handle. So, ganyan. Now, for the demonstrations and synchronous assessments, of course, compared to other forms of assessment, these types of assessments may be more difficult to fake, since you can easily see the learners naman, if they're doing the work, kasi nga synchronous session and or recorded sila. Nevertheless, a few students siguro may seek shortcuts in the assessment if the assessment will place a necessary burden for them. So, considering that possibility, you need to gather information then from the learners and provide instructions in advance. Your instructions may focus on addressing the concerns on resources. So you need to ask them what resources do they have? Do they have the device solely for their use? Are they sharing? If that's the case, what would be your instructions for them? Do they have access to a stable internet connection? Will there be alternatives to the synchronous session? Will there be allotted time slots for smaller groups? Or will the synchronous session be one full class? If there will be slots for small group sessions, how will they sign up for it? What will be the time slots and how will they sign up? And then create clear assessment rubrics and communicate this to the students in advance. What will be the details of the assessment guide and rubrics? Kasi it will serve as additional points for them to prepare for the session, improve on their performance if ever, unless it will be crucial in your learning outcomes. It's crucial that they will be able to perform the task on the spot. If that's the case, this guide, of course, is not applicable. But you do, of course, still provide mock session. Kasi this may lessen their anxiety, as mentioned, kanina test lang yun, but this one, if it's a performance. So, if performance the synchronous sessions, baka the mock session will be able to help lessen their anxiety and make them be more familiar with navigating whatever tool that you're using. And then clarify the session protocol, allot time for access or technical concerns. And what shall communicate this? What shall the learners expect during the session? Will they need to provide proof of identification? Kasi there are some naman na ganun na need rin yun. Is there, tapos yun, the reasonable amount of time to address any access or technical concerns. And then after the demonstration, you can include pa rin a sort of follow-up or have them reflect on their performance. So that's another set of assessment after. And then for projects, multi-part projects and portfolio assessments, of all the forms, these sets, they're the most difficult to falsify. Of course, the synchronous one is difficult to fake because you can easily see that it's them doing the work. But this one, it's difficult to falsify in the sense that they cannot just, cramped. At the same time, these are the types of assessments that are most meaningful when implemented well. Yung mention nga natin na guideline kanina pa, di ba? It considers fitting assessments which could lead to the final project or the e-portfolio. The whole point of splitting assessments or designing linked assessments, stressed earlier in the earlier discussions, is to use them all to lead to that final project or portfolio. And at the course level, they will be able to accumulate and build on their work while also reflecting on the overall experience through dun sa different sections of the project and or portfolio. And then on a larger scale, grander scheme of things, they can relate these to the rest of the courses in their respective programs. At not only that, hindi lang siya culminating dun sa final project or portfolio na magdi-discourage ng dishonest behavior. It may also help them beyond the class and beyond the program pa nga. Kasi they have that as sort of evidence of their growth and as well as outputs. You know? Especially if there's that documentation of whatever it is that they've produced or achieved, but also reflection from the authentic and performance assessments that you have to do or conduct. Because through those, the combination of the actual outputs plus reflections, they may be able to contribute to the development of the knowledge itself. And then another, to try to explore the use of self-assessments and peer assessments as a component of the project and portfolio. It adds another layer din kasi for the learner's sense of purpose and clarity over their progress. Tapos yun nga, the reflective component of it. That's for specific tips and strategies for specific kind of assessment. As a closing for the discussion, research and experience suggest kasi that developing elaborate plans, planning for how you can deal with cheating behaviors, especially in online and or remote setting. You will lose as a teacher. And actually, you don't want this to be a competition. You as a teacher against the student. When in fact, you have to be the mentor assisting the student's progress and learning. Although we do recognize the sort of auditor role, may ganun pa rin naman na role ka as a teacher is supposed to be more knowledgeable and skilled. But essentially, if you are going to focus on that, preventing cheating instead of promoting assessment integrity, you will lose because of two reasons. Kaya din yung presentation now, nag-focus lang siya into these two. First, you maintain course alignment and consistency in the instructional design. And then second, you promote academic integrity, communicate your expectations and code of conduct, engage the learner in the assessment process. Kasi if you focus on the chance that a few students would cheat, your message there would be sort of like you don't trust them. And if that's what their impression will be, what do you think their reactions will be? So they will respond in kind. So tipong, oh, okay, you're expecting me to be dishonest anyway. And that's what I'm gonna do. Plus pa, if they expect that the others will cheat, will seek shortcuts just so they can advance, then they'll feel disadvantaged, di ba? So mas malaki din yung temptation. So malaki din yung temptation for them to seek shortcuts as well. At the same time, if you actually even this, with all the resources out there telling us how we can prevent cheating, we're essentially indirectly giving them the idea as to giving them the map as to how they can deal with that as well. Okay, this is what my teachers know, so I have to modify yung teaching, yung cheating strategy ko. Mas ganun yung naging messaging natin kasi dun sa students. So, might as well focus on the more relevant aspects of planning and implementing your assessment. Now, for the activity in the training side, really, since I mentioned nga, I summarized them, the strategies, tips, and guidelines into 5 lang, with all those specific guidelines for each kind of assessment. The activity in the training side is simply asking you to go back to your version of a course, that's a course plan. Choose a specific assessment to analyze and build on. Set of assessment, actually. That may correspond to the assessment methods we mentioned earlier, the quizzes or the types, the quizzes or test types that will be administered online, for example, using a specific platform, and or that may be incorporated in the printed module, online discussion forum or boards, the written assignments, paper, reports, infographics, performance or demonstrations, even tangible projects, and e-portfolio. So you choose 2 assessments. Tapos provide a description of that assessment task, the purpose or combination of purpose of the assessment, and then add 3 new guidelines or strategies which can help promote academic integrity based on your experience as a faculty and as a teacher trainer, actually. There's a template dun sa, this nervous. There's a template in the course site that you can follow. Obviously, the guidelines, strategies, tips that you will provide, they're empirical. They're based on your experiences as content experts and faculty. So at the very least, the activity will be assessed based on the originality of your contribution, compared with other participant submissions and against online references, and or if the references that you used are cited properly. So ganun lang. Ganun siya kasimple, but it has greater use din kasi na we're going to build on the set of guidelines and strategies that would be more suitable for your respective disciplines. So mas ganun siya. I'm gonna make it available in a short while kasi it will be in the form of a submission bin, but you can declare if you're comfortable enough to share it among the participants, the faculty from other SUCs, HEIs, or not. So may ganun naman na declaration if ever. Of course, it will be licensed na under Creative Commons license, and may proper attribution dapat sa inyo being the source of the strategies, guidelines, or tips. These are the references. They're also in the study guide in the course site. And with that, I'll end the presentation. If you have any more questions, don't forget to just explore the numerous open educational resources in the UPOU network. So, stop sharing. And I guess open forum na. I'm gonna check now. Ha! Pakadae. Okay, so more on comments. Si Ma'am Jeline Alentahan. I like these different kinds of appeals, especially in relating them with the university's core values. Exactly. You have your own set din kasi. These are general strategies and or appeals that you can incorporate in your messaging, but your institution, your colleges, your universities, you have your own set of priorities, values, diba, that you would want to highlight. So mas integrate natin siya doon sa guide natin sa students. Okay. Validity of assessment poses a great challenge to us in this new normal setting. Let's just clarify by yun. Actually, I didn't discuss now, review the basic principles in terms of validity of the assessment tool, reliability, washback, mga ganyan. Because your assessment experts actually in your respective institution can already cover that. Mas more on lang talaga reminder, especially in this situation na nasa online and more flexible learning scenario tayo. Okay. From UPOU networks, are there available programs, applications, software that can be used for online quizzes, tests that allow the limiting of time to respond to the question? One item is viewed at a time among others. Does G Suite have this feature? Okay. In our case kasi, Moodle has that. In the first assessment webinar I conducted last March, that's part of the focus. Merong mga few sets lang, list of applications, programs, software na you can explore. Yung Google Form kasi as a quiz, kasi it can be turned into a quiz, di ba? I haven't explored kung merong limited time for a specific page. But what you can do na lang is you do the test or the quiz in chunks. Like if it's a 20-item test or quiz, you create 4 or 2 Google Forms na quiz. So the first 10, if it's just 2, if two sets, then 10 items each, diba? Tapos you make available lang the first one during this period, yung mga ganon. Mas ganon yung mga workaround dyan if G Suite. I haven't checked kung meron silang mga add-ons na iba pa, bukod dun sa Google Form as a quiz. But yung Moodle, meron yun, allowed to. So if Moodle-based yung LMS nyo. May quiz feature din. Wait, I have to open tuloy the previous presentation. But anyway, yung iba pang LMS, actually, pwede naman po mag-comment yung iba, no? If you're using a different kind of LMS. Okay, the rest are... Okay, can we use essay type assessment in asynchronous session to students? Essay asynchronous, actually it works because, for example, kahit lang essay which will be shared or which will be okay to be shared sa mga estudyante, sa fellow learners niya. You can use the discussion forum or discussion boards. Tapos you just need to clarify dyan na, okay, we do that in UPOU. You'll see the different FICs na they'll ask the students to address a set of guide questions in the form of a 500-word essay, for example. And then there are other guidelines in terms of the expected content and flow of discussion, even tapos yung assessment rubric. Tapos they'll just post it as a discussion forum entry. Yung iba naman as a sort of short paper lang, yun nga, the essay. Tapos is papasubmit sa submission bin. At lahat yun ay asynchronous, no? Meron ka lang set of schedule, timeline for them to be able to post, for them to be able to submit. Pwede na rin po yun. Si Sir Jerome Liabres yung nag-task. Okay. I addressed this about for Google Classroom na. Ayun pala. Thank you, Ma'am Helen Espartero. In Google Classroom, we can also control the time and we can shuffle the questions. Deadlines can be set. See, merong mga add-ons na yung actually that's one good thing rin din talaga sa mga platforms and softwares now. Given kasi the current situation, they're being relatively medyo generous naman na sila with all the add-ons na pwedeng i-explore. Oh, there are others software din. I didn't include in my previous presentations dun sa about assessment. I usually have a portion na may sort of table, tapos per kind of assessment, may gano'n yung mga the tool, software you can explore. I didn't include it here mainly because I want to focus nga on the design and implementation of assessment in relation to promoting academic and assessment integrity. Kasi din naman, precisely because of this, other experts, faculty, and teacher trainers can provide their own based on their actual experiences, di ba? So, hindi lang naman sa akin manggagaling yung mga list. Moodle can shuffle, yeah. Ayun, Edmodo has time limit din daw, according to Ma'am Jeline Alentahan. Oh, sabi ni UPOU model ni Shari, you may also speak to me daw. Ask question. Oo nga naman, ako lang yung nagsasalita. Raise your hand lang po. Okay. What is the most, this is a common question. From Ma'am Tintin Remoquillo. What is the most appropriate assessment to use in laboratory class? That's a difficult question as in ang qualifier natin most appropriate po, no? But even our science teachers or science faculty, for example, we have a colleague who handles chem classes. Even she proposes, personally, ang preference niya would be if these are high stakes assessments na the students, the learners will really have to do the actual lab experiment. For example, you have to wait. Ganyan. Kasi crucial na matutunan nila yung skills and all. Pero, as a set of formative assessments, you can start with the existing simulations out there and na tipong, what she does is she looks for open educational resources, yung mga recorded na lab experiments already, and then provide linked formative assessments lang. For example, mag-start lang muna. So you watch this and analyze this video of this experiment, tapos using this set of guide questions. Tapos may mga processing na siya na in terms of, wait, I can open pala para mas envision nyo yung sinasabi ko about linked assessments. Pero formative assessment forms pa rin yung kaya niyang magawa doon. So as a sort of lang preparation for the students doing the actual lab work. And at the same time, writing the major lab report. Kasi even she is saying, kung crucial na matutunan ng learners na they'll be the ones to conduct the lab work, you really have to wait na medyo mas, kasi crucial, if pwede naman, another solution din kasi yung mga home-based na labs, diba? Pero even that is limited at saka depende rin sa kind ng learners and resources ng learners natin. So pwede yun na-explore if possible, if secured. Pero if not, huwag natin pilitin. Kasi unique naman nga din yung situation natin now. Kaya yun na nga, di ba? Kaya we go back to the drawing board talaga. And we try to decide kung what are the most essential learning competencies na kailangan nila talagang ma-meet given the situation now. Wait, where's that? I'm looking for the lab experiment. Okay, I can share this. Oops. Siyempre, mag-focus ako doon. Napakadaan yun lang. I will share. I want to show kasi. This one. So here, since demonstration of concepts lang naman siya, so she found this experiment, intermolecular forces lab. Tapos may annotation siya as to what to expect. This is the video. Tapos in-explain pa niya na there are 4 experiments here. But as an assessment activity, formative assessment, she provided a worksheet incorporated in the module. Tapos they need to fill it out. That worksheet, the completed worksheet, will then be the basis for their lab report. So, mas ganun. Next. See, from Sir Francis Pantino. This one's sharing. In our institution, we practice departmentalized midterm and final exams, so the high-stakes assessments. Since the setup is now different, is it still appropriate to have departmentalized exams? Departmental exam, will there be more or less or none at all questions to their integrity if these exams were administered online? Okay, dami related sa midterm and finals. Does UPOU give online midterm final exams? In my experience before, final and compre exams were given face-to-face. Alright. Okay, isa-isahin po natin, no? At the course level, if it's a midterm exam, final exam, it's really the call of the faculty and the program where the course belongs. Kasi nga, yun nga, in the review of the curriculum, what will be the most essential learning competencies, what are the essential learning outcomes that need to be addressed. Meron pa rin po courses that conduct midterm exams and final exams. And by that, I'm assuming we mean kasi that the tests, the more traditional tests, quizzes with your MCQs, true or false, and so on and so forth. And if that's the case, either one strategy is the use of either proctored software or the dual cam setup. So you have Google Meet, then you ask your learners to have at least 2 devices, kasi one should be used for the session where you can see the test environment, and then the other device should be placed where you can easily see the monitor that the student is using. Tapos you provide all the rules the guidelines that are needed for the students to answer the exam smoothly. At the same time, if it's powered by Moodle, you can see din naman kasi if na-interrupt yung pagsagot nila. I mean, the history of how they answer the specific items. In relation to the compre kasi, qualifying exams, comprehensive exams, yun yung proctored online exam talaga because they are high-stakes exams. Pero kung course level, so ganun yung one way. Another way would be you explore the use of linked assessments. Now you have that on one end. Say, for example, it's 20% of the final grade, the final exam na quiz. Pero it's supplemented by, for example, a paper, short paper, wherein there's this assumption that their writing style and so on and so forth, and build on mo na yun, skills nila doon. Tapos, the kind of assessment design for that paper would require that they understand yung mga key concepts na covered dun sa quiz or test sa more traditional na item. Kasi expound lang din nila dun sa paper. Which would tell you if sila yung nagsagot, for example, kung mataas yung score nila dun sa quiz, pero sobrang lost yung paper component of it, then meron na siyang meron ng question yun sa'yo, di ba? Yung mga ganun na mechanism. Is it advisable po is it advisable po to use identification modified true or false as learning assessments in modules? This is something that I cannot answer 100%. No, it depends kasi on the topic that we're talking about, the module that we're talking about, and these are more traditional items, not test items, quiz items. And the answer really is yes, pwede. Kasi it's your decision naman. It's your and your colleague's decision. Pero, ganun pa rin po ulit. Balik tayo dun sa course alignment natin. And also, balik tayo dun sa what kind of assessment will this be. Formative assessment ba siya? If it's formative assessment, all the more na pwede. Pa rin. Kasi we're not saying naman na, oh, you just do alternative forms of assessment. May value pa din po talaga the traditional forms. Okay. I like the fact na ang dami pong nagko-contribute dun sa pag-address dun sa other add-ons and or software, no? About Google Forms. Okay. There's this question on the secure exam browser for the latest na Moodle. If so, how was your experience? I tried. Okay, this one's a blooper. I tried it kasi the version of Moodle before, meron na siyang ganito, sort of a JavaScript security something. Hindi naman po ako ganun ka-techy. Ano lang, sakto lang. So that's one good enough way. Pero this time, meron na siyang safe exam browser. May security, meron pa rin siyang issue in the sense na the students cannot safely proceed. No, I consulted this now with our ICT administrator, my portal administrator, and we're working on it para mas makapag-provide ng guide. Kasi fail yung my personal experience, no? Fail yung experience ko sa kanya in the sense na hindi agad na check ng mga students yung quiz. And that's just for a mock quiz, no? Kaya hindi ko na rin siya tinuloy for the graded one. How is proctored online exams being done? The one that I described po, if it's you have to have ito. That's why in the study guide dun sa course site, in Moodle, I clarified the contexts and assumptions first. Na definitely merong system of assessment that should be done, that are done, being established at the different levels within your institution. So in this case, in our case kasi, for the proctored online exams, mostly for the high stakes assessment talaga siya. And we have an exam services unit for that. So ganun yun mangyayari, ma'am, in terms of proctored online exams. You have to have your pool of proctors. Now, of course, you have to have the qualifications para dun sa proctors kasi they'll be the ones to administer the assessment, the high stakes assessment. Tapos, kahit po simple lang, kung if you're not subscribed yet to a proctoring software, yung meron pa rin ikaw na proctor, and then they'll be the ones to connect with the learner. Tapos, say, for example, through Google Meet. And then you make use of secured Google Drive folders, mga ganyan. Kasi yung security setting nila ay ganito lang. During this period lang mag-review yung resource, and they cannot download, and so on and so forth. Tapos nga, you have the dual cam setup where you can see their activities dun sa screen. At the same time, you can see the test environment. They have suggestions on the specific components of digital or e-portfolio. Okay. Sagutin ko siya, sir, ng isa-isa. The specific components, I can speak for the nature, based on, I can answer this based on the nature of the courses that I'm handling. For example, that's another context and assumption. There are requirements, assessment requirements in kasi that are discipline specific, di ba? So here, definitely, isang major component na dyan would be a documentation and narration of whatever it is that you have asked them to do from the beginning pa lang of your course and then as the semester progresses. But that's just one aspect. Documentation is just one aspect of it. Plus, iba-ibang kinds of documentation yon. There should also be, I'm speaking, for example, in the case of our practicum in language and literacy education. Aside from the documentation component of it, and then because it's a practicum, there's the planning and needs assessment component. So ano yung result ng needs assessment? Nandun din dapat yon sa portfolio nila. In terms of the design of the instructional materials, andun rin siya. Then, the major component, bakit din siya nagle-level up, yung the portfolio, yun nga, then the reflection component of it, the processing of whatever narration that you've asked your students to have, documentation and narration. So yun yung mga key components ng e-portfolio natin. I would assume na generic yung binibigay ko kasi the details will depend on the details that are needed to address a specific learning outcome for your course. Minimum or maximum number of components. You have to be, in my e-portfolio guide, of course, the number of weeks or the duration of the actual work din kasi would matter. There's no fixed formula as to the minimum maximum number of components. I have already an initial list, but I might be able to enrich it through your suggestions. I want my students' portfolio to be a showcase of their best work, a process and an all right. That's the thing din kasi there are different kinds of assessment po. If it's going to be showcase, portfolio, and so on and so forth. So here, if yun nga, if the one component would be documentation, and by documentation, you can further divide that dun sa stages din kasi ng work. So if there is a planning component of it, then documentation of the planning stage. And then whatever key outputs that you ask them to do. In one of our courses, this is development of instructional materials na rated sa LLE. After the needs assessment, yung may initial research. So yung mga minor, mga formative assessments as well as assignments po nila ay understood na yon na ilalagay nila kasi yun, may incorporate yun dun sa portfolio nila. Tapos, after that, meron mga guide questions that you'll ask para ma-prompt sila for a reflection essay or kahit nga vlog, recorded vlog if they're more comfortable na mas vlog. So, ganun yun, sir. Okay na ba? Malapit na mag-lunch. So, meron pa ba? Yung wala na akong masyadong na kikita. Na-overwhelm na po ba tayo? I mean, I'm for sure, the teachers that you need to train or assist, they're not starting from scratch naman na. Baka nga these are just additional considerations. Can open my... There are no more questions. Meron pa po ba? Or baka naman po nagla-lunch na kayo. Pa-deliver naman po dyan. Kung nagla-lunch na. Actually, yun din pala. I guess, sort of parting message, we need to be kinder to ourselves rin as the teacher trainer. At the same time, to our colleagues. Lalo na itong usapin ng assessment, as I mentioned, it's a bloody, messy, complicated issue or concern. At as most of you know or recognize, hindi siya kayang ma-cover ng one short session, if ever. No? Sa iba, 1-2 SEMs, 2-3 courses ang concern ng assessment. Now, all the more now na you are trying to sort of marry the idea of your assessment in the more traditional setting, tapos now sa open, flexible, distributed, remote setting. So, ano lang yan, lagi lang what will be our negotiable and non-negotiables based on what's stated in the curriculum naman. And given what will be the kind of knowledge and skills and attitudes that you would want your students to have enduring understanding of kasi. So with that, ayun na, puro mga thank you. Bakit hindi, I'm gonna change my. Okay na po? Tahimik. Kasi, technically, hanggang 12 lang ba to that works? Lex? Child?
Yes po, ma'am.
Oh, we still have 9 minutes. No, pwede naman po, you can, if there are concerns, you can always post naman messages dun sa Moodle, diba? Ayun pala nga, as I mentioned, I'll just make available the final assessment activity for this topic doon sa core site natin. But the rest of the key resources and discussions and concepts na I mentioned today, nandun naman na siya dun sa core site. Tapos, ideally, before you arrive at and or submit the summative activity for this topic, meron previous 2 activities, which is sort of linked assessment siya. But we do understand na the faculty naman are busy, so hindi siya required activity. It will just help you really work on the summative assessment, the last activity. Mas ganun lang naman yung idea niya. Because of course, that's the idea that I would want to propose, diba, that you consider and or you help your faculty with. So, dinemonstrate ko lang siya doon sa course site natin. So, mas ganun lang po. I'm trying to look for a portfolio guide, but sobrang dami ng. I guess I can place it siguro dun sa site, no? I mean, for your consideration. And or other resources na kinonsult ko rin naman in the preparation of the portfolio guidelines. So, yun. And with that, I'm sure gutom na. For those na sinamahan kami na hindi pa nag-lunch, no? And for those na kasalukuyan ng kumakain kaya hindi naka-on yung camera, enjoy pa. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully nakatulong at least to prompt yung mga other pang considerations nyo, no? In your planning and in your own training programs and activities, engagements in your respective schools and universities. Maraming salamat. I guess, ano ba to, Lex? I will leave. I can end it for all, or you will do that?
We'll just end the meeting po, ma'am.
Okay, Okay, and with that, salamat! Kasi yun, di ba usually sa mga Zoom, mga awkward goodbyes after, parang hindi mo alam kung ano ba, mag-leave na ba ako, may mag-miss ba ako na concept or something. Ayun na daw. Wait lang, baka may message. Baka may miss ako na message. Final babay. Ay, pinapahirapan ko ba yung editing nung MC? Okay. Again, thank you so much for your time. This is assessment and assessment integrity in the online and flexible learning environment. Thank you.